Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:06 here as we wrap up this 4-hour extravaganza. If you missed any of it, well, you're missing out. So please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss a thing. Coming up in 30 minutes, Attorney General Jason Miyares of Virginia. I'm Larry O'Connor with Mercedes Schlapp. Mercedes, it's always a good morning to start it with you.
Oh, thank you, Larry. I'm looking forward to having our conversation about farmers markets, but you keep ignoring it. But we'll get there eventually. KT is definitely more important than that.
That's true. In fact, the only thing better than starting the morning with Mercedes Schlapp is to start it with Mercedes Schlapp and KT McFarland, of course, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Trump, author of the book Revolution. Good morning, KT.
Good morning, both of you.
I've been gushing since last night when I had the rare privilege to sit in for Mark Levin just hours after the address from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a joint session of Congress. I thought that it was so statesmanlike, so powerful, so empathetic, and really did make the case as to why this enduring relationship between our nations must continue. I'd love for you to not only react to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said, but what the international diplomatic message sent by Kamala Harris deciding not to show up for this speech when she had actually a constitutional role there as vice president to be there.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I thought you were terrific, by the way, hosting Mark Levin's show last night.
Oh, thank you.
But I thought that Netanyahu, it wasn't Churchillian because he's not Churchill. Nobody's Churchill. But it really was eloquent, and it made the point, and it made the case. And it did so by telling stories, which is always the best way to make a point. And when he talked about what happened in the October 7th raids, where the little children were up in the attic, and then anyway, it's just hard to even repeat because it's such a horrible story.
Yeah.
But I thought he really made the case well, and he made it as a logical case, not just an emotional case. And it is your enemy. Our enemies are your enemies. And in fact, I think he's absolutely right. The stunning contrast, though, was what happened outside when the pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas crazy demonstrators, or youthful idiots, as Netanyahu called them, referring to Lenin's quote, I just, they don't know what they're talking about.
And it was absolutely disgusting. They vandalized the area outside of the Union Station, raising the Palestinian flag and taking down the American flag. I mean, it really raises these questions of who's funding these pro-Hamas protesters. I know that that Netanyahu talked about these protesters in his speech, criticizing them. But, obviously it sounds like Iran's involved in all of this. And the mere fact that we're seeing college students here, even in America, and just Americans involved in these pro-Hamas protesters. I mean, what's gone wrong here?
That's the really scary part, because who can figure it out and how do you change it? It's as if the college campuses have all been brainwashed to thinking somehow Jews are horrible, let's kill all the Jews, let's destroy Israel. And Hamas, which gives nothing to its own people, all it wants its own people for, as Netanyahu said, is human shields. They want their people to die because they want the PR shock value of it. That somehow college campuses have been just sort of seduced into this, I guess, flavor of the month craziness. The good news is, though, in New York, the major New York law firms, the major global law firms headquartered in New York, have all said, if you go to these protests, if you're burning the American flag, if you're protesting and you're chanting, from the river to the sea, don't bother to apply to us for a job. And they've actually hired experts who are going to comb through the social media to make sure that the people who are applying for their prestigious jobs aren't hired, not even considered to be hired. So that's the good news. There will be a penalty.
KT McFarland is our guest. And KT, I'm struck by the fact that so many foreigners, people in other countries, don't really understand how our government works. Most of them live in a parliamentary system, if they are a democracy, which is a little more simpler to comprehend as to who wins and who loses. They can't quite understand our electoral college. They don't understand a lot of things. And I'm sure they don't understand what just happened with Joe Biden now dropping out, not from the presidency, but from re-election, but after our primary process. Now we're going to have a convention. Kamala Harris installed. Do they look at this as sort of the shady dealing that it appears to be on the from those of us who have witnessed it transpire? Because we're supposed to stand on the international stage for democracy, fair play, the people get to choose their elected representatives, and we just, put that through the shredder.
Blew past that. There's sort of two reactions that are happening globally. One is from our allies, and they're scratching their heads or they're holding their breath because they're thinking, who's in charge? Who's the president? Or who's really running things? And who's the candidate? Who's going to be running things? Is it the permanent state? Because it increasingly looks like it's the permanent bureaucracy and maybe some Washington insiders who are running everything. So they're not sure what to do. Where's American global leadership? America can't even lead itself, much less the world. And then on the other hand, it's our adversaries who are looking at this and seeing a moment of extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to exploit and take advantage of the United States. So whether it's Moscow or Beijing or Tehran or Pyongyang, they're all looking at this and saying, nobody's in charge here. America is always vulnerable during a transition from one presidency to another. But this is a vulnerability on steroids. And so they're all considering, and I do believe they will start to be making their moves. I think Iran's already done it. Iran more or less announcing that it's going to have nuclear weapons in about 2 weeks' time. Tony Blinken confirming it. Iran unleashing its proxies against Israel. Iran interfering, with American domestic politics by funding a lot of these groups. So I think Iran's making its move, and the others are going to watch. Does Iran get away with it? Is there any consequence? Probably not, because the Biden administration is so distracted with its own internal problems, and the Democrats Washington is so distracted with its own political and internal problems that will the others then make a move? I think it's likely that Iran makes the move first and then Russia second.
It's to also know that Kamala Harris, she snubbed Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech. She was hanging out with her sorority sisters. But it just and Speaker Nancy Pelosi calling Netanyahu's speech the worst that we've seen in terms of foreign dignitaries who have spoken in front of the U.S. Congress. I mean, it clearly shows that there's the treatment of the Democrats to Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, and the treatment of the horrible treatment towards Prime Minister Netanyahu. I mean, why the difference, number one? And number two, what do you expect coming out of the Biden meeting with Netanyahu today?
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a pretty frosty meeting. And at best, Netanyahu's going to hope to come out with a photo opportunity and maybe some kind of a pledge to fast-track the delivery of weapons, which Israel so much needs. But to me, the symbol of Kamala Harris, vice president, she had a constitutional responsibility to be there. She blew off Netanyahu. The fact that she's done it and she's the hope and future of the Democrat Party tells me a couple things. One, the Democrats are now, their direction is anti-Israel, anti-Semitic. They're now that party, the party that we never thought we would see in our lifetimes. But the other is, again, the signal that this sends to Iran, if it's waiting for its moment of opportunity and it sees that there's a rift between the United States and Israel, and a rift that's likely to get bigger if the Democrats retain control in Washington. And then the prospect of Donald Trump coming in January, and that's the new sheriff in town. Trump has shown by his previous actions as president that he's pro-Israel, that he's anti-Iran, that he'll crack down on Iran, he'll bankrupt Iran like he did before, and that Iran will have trouble supporting any wars. In fact, the Iranian mullahs will have a lot of trouble staying in power if they bring and deliver economic hardship to their own people. So Iran's got to look at this and say, amazing window of opportunity, wide open. Let's take it now because it's going to potentially, if Trump wins, it potentially closes, slams shut in January.
Katie, really quickly, now that we've had this official announcement from Joe Biden and he is not going to run for re-election and he's the lamest of lame ducks now for the next 6 months, is there any indication that you're seeing or any concerns that you're seeing from our adversaries that they might take advantage of this obvious vacuum?
Well, Iran's already started. And what will Russia do? I think the fact that the Ukrainian leaders are sort of talking about a settlement deal with Russia is a pretty clear indication that they're worried about it. I do think Russia will pull out all the stops on Ukraine and get even more vicious and brutal than it has before. The question is, will Russia go further than that? they're all looking at this and saying, yeah, we never thought we'd get a chance like this against a weakened America that's distracted and can't figure out how to put one foot in front of the other. We don't even know who's in charge in Washington anymore. And then what it does to our allies is not only scratching their heads but saying, gee, can we count on America? Maybe it's time to cut our own separate deals with America's adversaries.
All right. Thank you, KT. Always a great conversation, even in these trying times. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.